Good evening, everybody. So glad that you're with us for this State of the Church address. I'm Andrew Shea. I'm the pastor of teaching and vision here at Branches. Very excited to spend this evening with you. Very grateful that you're setting aside some time either live right now or after the fact to tune in with what's going on, both in the landscape, the spiritual landscape of the country that we're in, our locality, what's been happening in the Branches community, some of the practicals of our finances, and then also for the question and answer portion, which is going to take place after my pre-recorded remarks. So we're going to play those pre-recorded remarks. They're a little bit extended. I had some things to share this year, certainly, about 30 minutes long. And then after that, I'm going to be back, and I'm going to be responding to some of your questions live. Now, I'd love for you, if you have any questions that you've been brewing on, for the last year, the last month, the last week, since yesterday when I told you I'd be doing this, whatever, go ahead and text those in. You can text those in at any point during this live stream. And of course, if things come out of the State of the Church, please text in questions on the other side of it. We've already got a few that are lined up that people sent in early, and surely that's going to be enough content for me to spend some considerable time on. So if we don't get to your questions, I'll try to be brief as I can without, abbreviating too much my answers to the questions that have already come in. But if we don't get to your questions tonight, you can be assured I'm going to follow up with you personally, or I'm going to make sure that we can give you answers to those questions in a different format. Now, I don't want to belabor this any longer. I'm going to ask that we play my pre-recorded remarks, and then I'll see you in about 30 minutes for the live question and answer portion. Welcome to this State of the Church. We provide this every single year as an opportunity for us as a church community to look back, to look at the present, and to look into the future. And it's another opportunity for us to encourage dialogue. There's going to be a question and answer portion this evening. I know that's going to be a live component. If there's anything that comes out of the information that I'm sharing, please text in those questions so that we can have a dialogue about the things that are on your mind and your heart. At the moment I'm recording this, I'm just recently returning from a 6-week sabbatical, and with that break and that extent of a break comes perspective. Our commitment to God's work here in HB just grows. So I'm going to get into the details of where we have come from and where we are as a community, but I want to start with the grander perspective for a few moments, the one I've been dwelling in through and on the other side of my sabbatical. As I step back and survey the spiritual landscape of the church community, of our city, of our state, of our country, our nation, our world, it's time for every single person who calls themselves a Christian to awake to the present moment and challenges that we are now facing. We're living in nothing less than an inflection point of major spiritual change. In fact, most of the data that I'm going to share with you would actually tell us that we've passed the inflection point, and we have some momentum, a massive amount of momentum that is guiding us in the wrong direction. I don't say that as a pastor, as a Christian, to stir up anxiety in any one of you, because there's no place for fear when we have faith, no matter what is going to come our way. We have to face the future with that kingdom-derived confidence that we're focusing on right now on our weekends. But I do mean to coax you into realizing the reality that exists beyond that endless Instagram scroll we can all get lost in, or the endless news cycle that we're hearing day in and day out, or the blur of your daily grind. There's big things that are happening in the spiritual landscape of America, and even right on down to our city. For instance, in 2021, for the first time since Gallup started collecting data, church met 7 attendees. Now that number is 65. The average size church in America right now, 22 years later, is 65 people. Just from 2019 to 2022, we've gone from having about 1/3 of Americans claiming to be participating regularly in a church community down to, in just that 3 years, a little bit north of 1/4 of Americans saying that they are participating. If the decline that I'm describing continues and optimistically even slows down, there's a recent study by Pew Research Group that says, okay, a couple years ago, prior to 2020, over 70% of Americans identified as Christian. Well, they project out by the year 2070, it'll be less than 40% of Americans will consider themselves as Christians. Hearing these stats, is it any surprise that with those declines and with the divisions and disruptions of the last couple years, when surveyed recently, the Barna Group did this study. They asked pastors, how likely are you to quit? Are you thinking about quitting your post? 42% of pastors today are considering leaving their posts altogether. The Pew Research Group that I mentioned earlier that did a study finished out their examination of this data with this less than upbeat suggestion. Revival could happen. There's just nothing in the current data that indicates it will. So what do we do with this? How do we make sense of this? Are we simply to blame COVID and the period of distancing that happened in just some of the churches across America? I mean, I wish the answers were that simple. To me, a crisis like COVID and our time of distancing and all the political and the social turmoil that went along with it, it wasn't the decider of people's faiths and faith. It functioned more like hitting a fast forward button on the trajectory that they were already headed in. Think about it. When you're in a crisis, do you sit there and you rethink your values and you have time to plan your course of action? No, when a crisis hits out of nowhere, you respond in the way that you've been prepared to respond up until the moment that crisis hits. And then out of the place that you were prepared to be in, you go over and over through these cycles until the crisis ends. And so it's more of a fast forward button on the trajectory of people. We saw that in marriages, marriages that were really struggling. Bam, hit them into a period of COVID, physical distancing, all the pressures of society, and it wasn't long before those marriages were in real trouble. Then, on the other hand, you take a good, solid marriage on a good trajectory, period of distancing, crisis, trauma, challenge, and yet they grow stronger in the context of those challenges. For a whole lot of people, the time of COVID and distancing didn't force them as Christians to be disengaged. It led them to actually rally and to engage more. Even as we saw, the opposite was also true. The point is, it wasn't a one-size-fits-all fate going through these last couple years, but the response of every individual to the circumstances around them and the way that they dealt with the responsibility they had to either lay hold of or abdicate their faith and their response as a Christian in a time of trial. The same dynamic is still at play even now, individually and together. We will determine the future through our attitudes and actions, even given the challenges of the spiritual landscape around us. You could call it a crisis of faith in our country, or you could call it a time, and on the more optimistic side where we're needing this posture of spiritual readiness. Whatever it is, it's a moment every single one of us is called to face. And there is no room anywhere in America, nor anywhere in our community, there's no room for complacency. There's no room for apathy anymore. There's no room for half-heartedness, for expecting someone else to do what only you can do, someone else to contribute what only you can contribute. We need, at this moment, we need to decide. It's not fatalistic. It's in our hands. It's with our attitudes and actions. We need to decide, every single one of us, to be all hands on deck. We need to be all serving. We all need to be participating. We need to all be giving our share if we're going to be part of a great reversal in our city, our state, and in our country. And again, I'm going to be real with you. If we can't, as branches, discover a path forward toward greater engagement, how will that path exist for future generations in this city? There are not that many people in church on an average Sunday in Huntington Beach. If you do the math, it's maybe 10,000 tops in a city well over 200,000 people. Nor are there many large gathering spaces for Christians in our city. I mean, I've been in these churches through Serve City. You drive by it, you think, oh, wow, that's a nice big facility, and there's another nice big facility, and there's another one on that corner. The church must be doing well. But then you go onto the campus, and you go into their worship gathering center, and you find out it's half the size of our gathering space at the senior center, or a quarter of the size of what we seat in the senior center. Looks are deceiving. And truly, we are one of just a few churches in this city that contains within it a younger demographic and a children's ministry and youth ministry of any substantial size. So what I'm saying is, if our community can't find a way to take this moment seriously, if you and I can't find a way to open up our lives, to prioritize our time, to give generously, then it will be a significant strategic loss for the whole of the city, whose effects we may not feel until we're 20 years down the road, when there's no place for a community to gather or for the next generation to come together and worship Jesus with any vitality. Now, I'm not a doomsdayer. I'm really not a doomsdayer. I have faith. Guys, I have faith. I am confident in Jesus. What I am presenting before you is the reality that HB, that California, that America will either have a greater or lesser share of the work that God certainly will do in the coming generations. God is going to be at work. You know, the truth of the gospel is going to go forward. The kingdom is going to expand. And really what is before us is this choice. Are we going to play a part in that work into the next coming generations? Jesus is victorious, guys. And we either get to enjoy that victory or we get to just lose our soul. Simply getting by, paying our mortgage, making sure we can send our kids to college so they can get good paying jobs in a tech company, building devices that just distract people from their spiritual state. And I know I'm kidding, like that's an elaborate example, but I'm just saying we can get caught up into that Orange County suburban pattern and miss the bigger picture of what is happening beneath our eyes. I'm not being a doomsdayer. I'm calling you to get involved. Step up the intentionality. Get smart about your commitments and your time. Place the community of God as a priority in your life, because the church isn't going to have this one-time big event that just knocks it off the landscape of America, like this one thing happened and then all the churches shut down. No, what's going to happen, the way it's going to fall apart is this slow demise of 1,000 apathies. That's what's going to cause us to fade into the past, when there's just not enough money anymore to keep pace with inflation, and there just isn't enough volunteers for the kids to actually enter into the classroom, and there just isn't enough mentors to model faith for the next generation. There just isn't enough passion to work with our bodies, to use our time, or to open up our mouth and speak the words of the truth of the gospel. And it just all sort of just fades away slowly. It's the demise of 1,000 apathies. It's this future where people aren't opposed to God and Jesus and the church. It's just they can't see that it's important enough to really get up in the morning and get there and be a part of it. You know, they're not outright opposed. They just don't have enough energy to make it happen anymore. Is it really worth it? Guys, it is worth it. It is worth it. It's worth fighting for. Our spiritual state might be the first thing that gets neglected in our lives when the pressure is high, but it's the most influential and substantial reality both for us personally and for us as a community in Huntington Beach and for this country, for this nation as a whole. We know that from the truth of the gospel, that we believe the commands of the scriptures, the convictions and beliefs beyond compare to anything in this world. We know that it's the most important thing, but also practically the state of our spirituality, guys, it affects everything. While the church is in decline, you can see it. The culture is in decline. And when they did surveys of people who stepped out of church, there's tons of people that have stepped out of church during the time of distancing. What'd they find? That when they moved away from faith community, when they moved away from their convictions, their anxieties and insecurities and fears were higher than the people who remained and the people who stayed committed. You would think that would cause people to return. But the emotional well-being of our country just continues to decline as participation in faith declines. We've got to wake up, church. We've got to fight the good fight of faith together. And we're fighting here, guys. We're fighting as a branch, as leadership. We're fighting as a branch, as community. We're not backing down. We're not giving up. We're not giving into discouragement. We're meeting the moment. I've got stats. I've got stories. You know, the whole staff team is recounting the things that have taken place in a staff meeting today, but also in my email so that I could recount those things to you. And it's just filled with life. It's filled with this fight of the faith that is going on in this city. Just think about it. As a community this past year, we're back in our traditions of being in the park and being at the beach. We always wanted to be, but now the city has given us those permits again. And what are we doing? We're doing what isn't being done. It's the public proclamation of the gospel. It's people making these public confessions of faith and being baptized. But it's not just in those formal services. Man, it's at our beach bonfires. We've got these Summer Connection beach bonfires. We're just going to hang out. We're going to have some s'mores or whatever, have a good time, get to know each other. And 17 people were baptized over the last 2 months in that setting because we're fighting this good fight of faith. We're also not just, rehashing the same programs. We launched for the first time this grafted class that we've hosted twice that is an introductory place for newcomers to understand the vision God has given us, this grand vision, the values, the purpose that we have here in the Branches community. Another one is coming up. It's a great starting place for people in our community. I was able to host for the very first time a class on spiritual leadership. We have a lot of people that are awake to what's going on in the world. They are investing, they are sacrificing. I'm going to speak about them in a few moments. And 40 people signed up for this class to understand what servant leadership is all about from the perspective of Jesus. And in our last community group launch, it's not everyone that's backing out of church community. We launched 4 new community groups, people saying, we want to be the family of God. We want to step into intentional relationships. And that's 4 individuals who said, I'm going to open my home week after week. I'm going to bring people in. I'm going to minister to them and lead them through the scriptures. It's amazing. It's not people backing down, it's people stepping up. In our marriage ministry, we hosted 3 workshops for the first time. They were so well attended. Average attendance was 90 people at each one of these events. Our women's ministry hosted their Women at the Well conversation, arguably, the largest women's event post-COVID. It encouraged women into greater freedom from sin and shame, conversations we've never had before in our history. We hosted our first ever grief support group to enable healing for people who've lost loved ones over the last couple years. We've given out counseling grants, more counseling grants than ever before, 13. We know the pressures on mental health, emotional health in today's world. And counseling can be cost prohibitive for so many. So 13 people were getting Christian counseling, quality Christian counseling that they needed to find healing. We've also given out $9,000 in crisis benevolence funds. So sure, maybe there was job losses back when, things were shutting down, but, now people have sort of moved on and we think everything's good. But there are people who are still in the course of life losing a job and they can't pay the rent and they've got kids, and we get to step in as brothers and sisters because you've been contributing to contribute to those individuals and make sure they have food on their tables. 14 couples completed a 9-week marriage course, and our first ever weekly prayer gatherings on Wednesday mornings have been taking place where the needs of our church are prayed over regularly by dedicated servants in our community. On the missions front, in addition to the ongoing work of our incredible ministry partners, I hope you get their updates, sign up for their emails, get the grander perspective of what God is doing in this city, not just through our one fellowship. But beyond that, in our missions work, we launched our Foster the City partnership, and we have, I'm so excited to tell you, multiple families in process to become foster parents, and others who've said in our community they're going to stand beside those families. Branches was also the primary driver of our city's first ever Love HB Serve Day, where through the vehicle of Serve City, over a dozen churches came together with 150 volunteers to serve our neighbors by beautifying and supporting parks and schools in our city. And then just a few months later, it's not like we're just one and done, one time a year we're serving. No, we hosted our annual Back to School Festival in the Oakview community, where nearly 500 people were fed, played carnival games, had activities, and of course got backpacks for the new school year. Over $2,000 was raised for Oakview Elementary's school programs right here in HB through that backpack drive. I mean, we'd done it for years, but what was so cool this year was for the first time ever, we had 7 churches. There were so many more churches in this city owning that event together, working in unity. In our children's ministry, we have an average of 90 kids per Sunday. That's looking at the year, but I can tell you, more recently, we've been well over 100 kids in our children's ministry for the past several weeks. That's going to take a lot of volunteers rotating throughout the month. Right now, we have 113 of you serving this next generation, and they are truly becoming, in this Branches community, the next generation, because we had a record 22 students transition up into youth ministry. So yeah, we've always had this like pipeline of newborns, right? But those kids are aging up now that we've existed for over 10 years as a whole, as a community, and now we're seeing our youth ministry grow. For summer camp, we had 36 students who went, winter camp, 45. But it's not just events that these kids are attending. These young people are being discipled by their amazing 16 volunteer leaders. Over 50 of these youth participated along Common Ground, our after-school program at Oakview, and Capernaum, the special needs ministry wing of Young Life. They all came together for the first time ever to experience this class alpha, where there's questions and discovery regarding the faith. 13 of our youth went through a youth preaching track so they could learn how to share the scriptures with their peers. And 6 of those who've gone through it have already shared at one of the youth services to their peers. And our youth group, as I shared on a recent Sunday, recently partnered with 6 other youth groups across Orange County. Guys, I keep saying this. This has never happened before in the history of Orange County, that these youth groups from different cities came together under the banner of OC Youth, and over 300 youth, including ours, got together for worship and for prayer and for fellowship with one another. This is a community, guys, this Branches community, that is deeply investing in this next generation and seeking to reverse the trends that I shared with you at the beginning of our society. And our young adults ministry is evidence of that. I'm proud to report, I'm excited to report, their largest gathering was just a couple months ago in August. They had over 50 young adults at their gathering. And again, it's not just about the breadth, it's not just about having these big events. It's the fact that we have 10 mentors in that young adults ministry pouring intentionally into 25 of those young adults on a weekly and monthly basis. And through their regular gatherings, they have launched 2 community groups themselves. Now, when it comes to worship, the team released a brand new album, Meditations, on Spotify. I encourage you to join in with the 40,000 streams we've had of the original worship music that's been performed and created through our community. You know, with a fresh expression and experience of the life of God being poured into us, there's going to be an outflow of that. There's going to be works that come out of that. And that's so true in our worship ministry. Our team is being revitalized by God, and they are leading us in that revitalization. And it's not just the same old songs. There is a new song to sing, just like there is a new chapter for us to step into as a congregation. It's not just fresh expressions of worship that are coming out of that worship community that leads us faithfully every single week. It's development, it's multiplication. We have 7 worship leaders. Do you guys realize that? Some churches are struggling, they're calling in, they're contracting one person from the outside. We have 7 from within our community, most of which are unpaid. And right now there's 3 brand new worship apprentices that are being trained up and multiplied in our community. And our hope is that, yes, they'll get re-embedded in our youth ministry and our children's ministry and all the different facets of the ministries that exist here at Branches. But the real dream is that we're going to multiply out, that the life that God is pouring into this Branches community is such that, and sufficient enough that we can pour it out into other communities beyond ourselves. Now, on that front, let's talk about finances. You know, annual giving this last year was $1.4 million, and our annual expenditures came in just under that at $1.37 million. We're maximizing the use of every dollar that comes in while attempting to be frugal and smart in every possible way that we can. The breakdown of our expenses is as follows: $80,000 to support local and global missions work, near $100,000 to fund the ministry expenses of our various ministry areas like children's, youth, worship, community life, $264,000 for facilities, that is the senior center, as well as the warehouse space that I'm recording this video in right now, and $695,000 for the wages and benefits of our 10 full-time and 3 part-time staff members. Funding that, we have 449 unique giving households in our database, with the average weekly gift being $65 per donor. The average says nothing of the individual stories because we are heavily weighted toward the vast majority of our finances coming from a small group that are giving above and beyond, while 21% of our community, a little bit more than a fifth of our community, give less than $30 per month. That's less than $360 per year. And that's of givers. I mean, really look at our giving culture with me. We know that around 700 people call branches home. We know hundreds of people then give nothing. And 47% of our actual givers give less than $1,000 a year. Considering the median income of Huntington Beach is near $100,000, that means that there's a large group among those who give who are likely giving less than a single percent of their annual income. All the time, I have people who give significantly coming up to me and saying, we need to talk about giving more. I was discipled in giving. I got an understanding of the value for me personally, the value for the church through teachings and about God's commands. And we need to talk about supporting the church. We need to talk about the tithe and how they would give 10% in the Old Testament. And guys, I've never set any of that as an expectation. I haven't gone that direction. On the other hand, we have these voices. I have people who tell me, oh, I'm so glad you guys never talk about money and you never make it a major discussion in the church. And they're right. Like I said, I've never once had a series on money in our 12-year history, nor have I made the application of a sermon, hey, give to the church. This year, we need to come up with a philosophy for giving in our culture as branches. You know, I don't want to fall into the trap of mixing up our messaging and having people wrongly associate this expression of the church with, you know, just this desire for money, when that's the furthest thing, genuinely, from our eldership's mind, from our staff's mind, and from any of our hearts. And yet money is a practical resource and part of the spiritual development and battle of Orange County on a personal and a communal level. There must be, looking at the data, countless individuals and families who've been with us for years, who say they believe in Jesus, who believe Jesus is the only hope for our city, who long for their kids to have a Christian community when they grow up here in the city, who aren't even covering the cost of their own seat that they sit in on a Sunday in the senior center. They're living in a state of massive spiritual contradiction. If that's you, I'm not asking for a short-term reaction. I don't want to talk about this every week just to get another quick response. I want those who aren't giving and those who are giving their pocket change to join with the devoted brothers and sisters they have around them and make long-term, regular commitments to give. And guess what? As I've always said, if you're struggling, if you can't pay the rent and you can't put food on your table, don't give, please receive. Others have given so that we can help you in your time of personal crisis, so that you can be provided for. And if you're a single mother and you're struggling to just give that $25 a month, I don't want to disparage that. Your gift of $25 in God's eyes could be seen as more than somebody's $10,000 that they don't even notice is gone. But for the vast majority who are not contributing, the story is different. There's room to be generous and still yet lack nothing in your life while furthering this valuable and vital kingdom work. And I'm not just talking about money, I'm talking about engagement overall, participation, saying yes to joining the welcome team, or volunteering in our kids' ministry, or leading a community group. They're things that we consider as small things that are massive things. When you don't join the welcome team and somebody comes to church and they break all the statistics, because how many visitors are there, but they're coming and they're gonna surmount everything that's going on in culture, and they show up and they feel out of place, and then no one says hi to them, they decide in their heart right then, I knew I shouldn't have come to church. And it's all because someone didn't say hi to them. It's a small thing. It's the most massive thing for that person's fate. And the person that's going to say hi is the person who's joined the welcome team, who's been equipped to say, I'm going to see those ones who are coming. And it's the same thing when a family shows up and they've got their kids and they're defying the demographics. They're not just taking their kids to sports on a Sunday, they're showing up to Sunday service, and they go to check their kids in and the ratio of leaders to kids is such that they can't check them in. So they can't focus during service, and so they move on and they don't find their place in community. And it's a small thing, right? Just someone signing up to volunteer once a month. But it's a massive thing. And when my child grows up, or other children in this congregation grow up, and they don't have a mentor, they don't have someone to walk with them and pour into them, and there's someone who says, I'm all alone, I don't know what the faith is about, I don't have anyone who cares for me, and they say, man, I want community, but they're not stepping up to host it. And nobody opens up their own home for all the people that say they want community. And so the community goes unbuilt, and we never become the church that the scriptures talk about, a church that is family. Man, it is a demise of 1,000 apathies, like I was talking about, from time to commitments to money, to intention and worship, to just attendance on Sunday. Wake up, church. Wake up. Take your cues from those who are awake. Every week, people are sacrificing their time and their energy to set up and tear down the events that you go to and that you benefit from and that you're a part of. They're taking a meaningful portion of their salary and they're setting it aside to pour back into your community that you're experiencing and that you're benefiting from, because they are faithfully worshiping God with their finances. They are talking to our kids about the Bible in children's ministry. They are pouring into your marriages. They are mentoring over coffees. They are praying for you while you're getting ready for work in the morning. They are loving and welcoming and opening their homes and placing their hands on you for prayer and leading you through the scriptures. They are supporting you. Join the many brothers and sisters around you who are stepping up with intentionality, and they are awake to the things that are going on in our culture. Make their work lighter by locking arms with they who are sacrificing for you, and start following their leadership. Let's set aside all the data and all the projections about the future and change the spiritual trajectory of our community, of our city, of our state, of our country by the power of God. We're facing the future with faith. We're not fatalists. We will fight the good fight of faith, knowing the strength of God, knowing His purpose, and seeking to serve, love, and to see salvation for the souls of those around us in this city. I'm not waiting on revival. I'm not waiting for someone else to take the lead. I'm not waiting for others to care. I'm choosing, and you can choose, to derive strength from God, from the Spirit. That's maturity. That's growth. That's discipleship. That's what it means to follow Jesus in times of plenty and in times of want. And I believe those who step up and make those decisions to contribute, they're going to see the promise that we can do all things through Christ who gives us strength. You're going to see it. You're going to see the strength of Christ in this next season when you step up, if you are here to see it. If you're here, if you're with us, if you're in to see it. All right. Thank you so much again for listening to those statements, listening to, again, my reflections on the spiritual landscape around us, the moment that we find ourselves in as Christians in this city, in this state, in this country, the amazing things that God is doing amongst us in this Branches community and the opportunities that are before us. Thank you for digesting that with me. And I know that this State of the Church address is one that draws in a lot of the core that I described at the end of that video right there. Those who are sacrificing and have a legacy of sacrifice in this church community, and you have a share in everything, all the fruit that I'm talking about that we can't even pack into a video, that can't even be put into words. And I just want to say I'm so grateful for you. It's so amazing to lock arms with true, devoted disciples of Jesus. And there are others of you, you've been caught up, not just in something that's going on in your own life. I hope you understand, as you hear some of these trends, there is something bigger going on that people are getting caught up in. And that, death of 1,000 apathies that I talked about, it's not just the individual circumstances of your life that have maybe made your faith wane a little bit. There's a real spiritual battle that's taking place. And there's a real decline
that's happening around us. And we all feel the effects of that. And we all have to make a choice to hold the line, to step in, to begin to contribute if those are the places that we've been in recently. It brings me to a passage as I consider the choice before us and really maybe the revelation that needs to occur in people's lives in this country and certainly in this community in Huntington Beach. It's here in Matthew chapter 13, verse 44. Jesus says, "The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field. When a man found it, he hid it again, and then in his joy went and sold all he had and bought that field." Again, verse 45, "The kingdom of heaven is like a merchant looking for fine pearls. When he found one of great value, he went away and sold everything he had and bought it." And these are these general, simple parables of Jesus describing what it's like to encounter God's kingdom, for someone to encounter the offer of life with Jesus and say, wait a minute, that's so valuable. It's so vast what I get to step into. I'm going to give everything for it. I'm not going to hold anything back. And really, that was Jesus' call to discipleship to all of the folks that he said, follow me too. He was asking them, hey, are you willing to let all this go so that you can lay hold of something that you see for yourself is greater? And so I'm wondering, what is the challenge for some today? There are many who are still making this choice. They're saying, you know what? I'm going to lay aside, my pure preferences, just my own self-satisfaction on the world's terms and success by the world's terms. And I'm going to devote time, energy, love, care, resources toward God's work. And it's not just in the branches community. It's all of our ministry partners. It extends beyond branches. It's toward God's kingdom. And there are others who I think have entered a period of crisis, spiritual crisis, where I don't know which side of the equation the issue's on. Do they not see the full value of God's kingdom anymore, that it's worth all that they could give up? Or do they think all that they have is worth more and it's valuable in its own right, too valuable to let go of? And I ask that question of you. Have you been sitting on the sidelines? Have you been feeling increasingly apathetic? If you don't have the energy to participate, if you don't have the energy to contribute, where are you not getting that vision, and how can you pray through that, and how can you walk through those questions so that you can see again for yourself the value of God's kingdom, which is exceedingly valuable, more valuable than anything in the temporary realities of this world? Or have the temporary realities of this world become exceedingly valuable to you to the point that you can't seem to let go of them for something greater? And so I leave you with that question, and that's a question of discernment for every single person here, but man, we have to capture that vision again of the greatness of God's kingdom and how it truly is worth evaluating everything and setting everything as secondary for this higher cause, this higher hope that we have in Jesus. Now, I want to move, having said that, to a portion of questions and answers. We've had a few already come in. I want to remind you that you can text in questions right now. If I can't get to them live, I'll get to them in another format. But there's quite a few substantial ones that have already come in that I want to start working through this evening. I've got to read these. Some of these are kind of extensive. People had time to think about this, which is great. The first question I have here is, what is the church's beliefs on when a leader in the church or even church member commits a big sin? The Bible says all sin is equal and gives steps to address sin in an individual. But with recent news in megachurches, I'm curious how our church would approach something like this. So, of course, I'm going to be inferring some things from that question, but I hear kind of this idea that, yes, there's big sin, and there's like disqualifying sin, and then there's just sin in general, which we're all sinners and we're all capable of wrongdoing, but you're kind of distinguishing these big sins as disqualifying sin. And when you're talking about things that are going on in megachurches, there's nothing in the headlines about an average congregant sinning and then that being exposed in the headlines. I think what you're referring to is high-profile pastors and leaders of megachurches sinning, and they're all sinners. We're all sinners, myself included, but sinning in such a way that they have disqualified themselves either temporarily or permanently from their posts in ministry. And, I've got to say, this has become so common, ridiculously common, impossibly common. I think that most of the key spiritual leaders of my youth that were prominent and influential in my youth, I would say the vast majority of them have either stepped away from ministry or they've been disqualified from ministry because of some major exposure of sin. And it's become so commonplace. There was a major news article that happened a couple weeks ago, and I didn't even hear anyone talking about it anymore. And nobody even told me. I found it accidentally. How did no one say that individual is not on their post anymore, but that they've had to step down because of some disqualifying sin? And I think it's just because people just assume this is what happens now. This is just so commonplace in megachurch and in Christian culture. And so what will we do about that? How will we address that if that were to happen within the Branches community? And, number one, I would say gratefully, there has not been on the level of staff or of elders any disqualifying sin that we've had to address in our 12-year history. So it's not like, we've had to put this plan into practice over and over again, and we've become experts in dealing with disqualifying sin in the leadership of the Branches community. And I would say that, we're prayerful and we're on guard and we're on watch that we simply would not fall into those same patterns. I think we have to accept that when we see these things happen, that, of course, our confidence is derived from the fact that Jesus is the head of the church, not these human beings, not our brothers and sisters who are capable of massive moral and spiritual failure. So we don't let, the fact that these individuals have fallen detract from, the strength that we have in our faith, because our faith is based on the perfection of Jesus. Okay, so number one, that. But I think also, we in the Branches community, I'm very critical of a lot of the culture of megachurches and a lot of the cult of personality that really seems to play into these patterns occurring elsewhere, and the lack of accountability that exists in a lot of churches where there's either not an elder board around a lead pastors, so they're able to go unchecked, and somebody brings an allegation forward and there's no one there to investigate it. Again, that is not the Branches community. So here, a couple things. First, we want to make sure that never occurs. Steps that I take personally, Billy Graham had the rule, right? That, and I don't know if it's still, in vogue everywhere, but Billy Graham had his rule where he's like, I'm not going to be alone in a location with a woman. And it's not just because something's going to happen because of one of us. It's because I want to remain above reproach in all things. That's a key rule for spiritual leaders. And so I have that. Part of that is I'm not on social media. I don't know if that hurts my influence, but that's just a step that I personally take because I want to be extra careful about promoting, this posture of being above reproach. That I don't have all these different avenues where people are going to contact me. I don't have anybody that can just contact me personally through my email. Mary Vandergood on our team sees every email that comes through. My wife has access to everything in my life. Those sorts of things. Like, we've got those things in place. And with our elder board, I'm one voting member of 9. So if there was an allegation that came forward, someone was to challenge my leadership in some way or someone on the staff, that elder board is going to take that up and they're going to investigate that because no one has the ability to just squelch that and say, we're not going to look at that because I'm the sole voice of authority. Now, beyond that, we don't have written out necessarily, here is our plan. But I can tell you, because of our values as a church community, number one would be transparency and clarity, communication. If you give people half the story, they will assume so many different things. You have to ride this line of, first of all, you're not going to shame and destroy somebody because it's all about restoration when somebody has sinned in the church community if they're repentant. So we're gonna be careful to affirm the fact that there's grace for everybody, that there's a restoration process for someone, but we're also not going to hold back if there needs to be clarity around, hey, this is the specific sin and this is what occurred and this is why we believe it disqualifies this person from leadership. And then beyond that, in all the church cultures I've been a part of, that individual, if they're repentant, would enter into a restoration process. And that would be a lengthy process, really determined by the gravity and how disqualifying that particular sin would happen to be. And they would involve outside influence. We're not just going to craft it ourselves. We'd bring in counseling. We pay for those resources. Those are just part and parcel of who we are as a church community. So, first of all, I just want to say I'm grateful for the integrity of our leadership. I'm grateful that we have a culture of accountability. We have a culture of transparency. And we are also not playing into, I think, a lot of the pitfalls of the cult of personality that exists in the megachurch movement. Okay, so that was question number one. There's more to it. We could talk more about it, certainly. It maybe brought up more questions. You can ask those later. Question number two, what is Branch's philosophy of ministry? And here I could talk for 45 minutes. I could talk for 3 hours, because that's essentially what I'm going to be doing between two different sessions of the class Grafted. Grafted starts next Monday night at 6:30 p.m. If you want to understand our philosophy of ministry, please attend next Monday and the following Monday, because I'm getting into all of that. I'm telling our story. I'm talking about our mission statement. Our mission statement is to be and make disciples of Jesus who love God, each other, and our neighbors as branches in God's growing kingdom. So right there, philosophy of ministry. We don't just believe it's about making disciples, preaching at them things we aren't. We want to be disciples first. We have to lead people in the things that we ourselves are experiencing. That's part of the hypocrisy of the church. Hey, everybody needs to know Jesus, and we ourselves aren't living like Jesus in the world. So being disciples, raising up disciples, not just getting people to raise hands, hey, I want to be saved, but making sure they're developed into Christ. That's a huge value in this community. What does that development mean? It's all about this love and devotion to God, which is going to also be connected to our relationships with each other and ultimately expressed toward our neighbors. And we're not the end-all, be-all of God's kingdom as branches. We fit into the broader picture of God's kingdom. So our mission statement says a lot. We've got values. We're built around God's presence. We believe the church is people. We believe it's built on full participation of everybody. This is the priesthood of all believers. Everyone is gifted by the Holy Spirit. Jesus is dynamically leading this church through the elder board. All of that in our philosophy of ministry, I am getting into in detail in our Grafted class. I really encourage you, sign up right now. We have childcare available. There is no reason that you can't be a part of it and really digest that philosophy with us and own it with us, because I believe it is a strong philosophy for ministry grounded in the Scriptures. Everything I'm going to talk about in that class is grounded in the Scriptures. Question 3, what are the qualifications for elders and deacons? Are they voted in by the congregation? Who decides who is qualified for leadership roles within the church? Great question. Obviously, qualifications. We have a qualifications paper that we work through. We've got a series of questions that we interview prospective future elders on. So they are evaluated based on a set of qualifications, and those are contained in the Scriptures, obviously. Titus chapter 1 you can go to, 1 Timothy chapter 3. They list the qualifications of elders and overseers. So we're going to carry all those qualifications into our branches community. There's also going to be, just the practical side of you've got to be known in the community. You've had to have some time in the community to be known. Not just, showed up and were, this amazing hero of the faith, but like we walked with you. We've seen you through circumstances in relationship. We have to know you. And knowing you is going to come out of serving. Are you invested in the community? Because, elders don't wait for the name, the title, the role to suddenly start eldering and leading and caring for the flock. They're doing it, and then we get to affirm what God is uniquely doing in somebody by calling them into eldership. They're not voted in by the congregation. This isn't just a democracy or this popularity contest. It's the standing elder board made up of 3 staff. I'm a permanent member as the functioning lead pastor, and there are 2 other staff members who are decided by the elder board on an annual basis right now. That's Brian Albright. He's our worship pastor, as well as Brock Snook. He's our care pastor. And then we have 6 lay elders, which just means that they're volunteers. They're individuals from the community who serve a 3-year term, possibly a 1-year extension. They can serve more than once, but they need a 1-year break in the midst, and that's just to make sure that there is this accountability in our elder board and not just these lifetime roles that become fixed. And, people change and they grow spiritually or they may not grow spiritually. And we just want to make sure that we have a means to address a healthy refreshing of our leadership culture and that we get to raise up other individuals for those roles. They have to be men. That's part of our position as a church, derived from the scriptures. Not everybody in our church is complementarian. Not everybody believes that the principal authority of the church has to be male. And we don't hold people to that standard in the branches community. They may be egalitarian, and they may personally believe that women should or can be elders in the community. And that doesn't, get in the way of our fellowship with anyone. But functionally, our position is a complementarian church, so they have to be men. They're brought before the congregation. And the congregation has a 2-week opportunity when we nominate someone for eldership to bring up reasons, charges, some experience, some testimony of why that individual they believe is not qualified for eldership. And then we go through a process of investigating those claims. That has never happened before in our history because we've had the most unbelievable men serve in this capacity over our 12-year history. You'll see we're on an annual schedule. A couple people every year are going to be rolling off that board, and a couple people will be rolling on, so you'll hear their names spoken. They're chosen by the elder board. People can nominate folks. We'll take nominations. We'll say, hey, do you know of anyone, community group leader or servant in the community, somebody in our ministry partners who you think would be qualified for eldership? And we take that into consideration in prayer. But again, it's not just a popularity contest. We're really praying. And I got to say this too, real quickly. It's the personality of the elder board too. When someone rolls off and they've got a particular set of giftings or perspective, there may be 5 qualified individuals who could come onto the board and they all have the opportunity to serve. But we're thinking through, well, what did we lose? Who just left and who can kind of fill that voice or that value so that we have a diversity of voices on our board. And so we're a balanced and healthy board leading as a team. So that's a bit looking into our board structure. Along with that question was this question: what is Branch's position, belief on women in leadership? And in parentheses, deacon, elder, pastor, etc. And so, along with that, I've already partially answered that question. We are a complementarian church for our official position. We're not saying that's the only position a Christian can have. We've done a lot of biblical study. We've looked at a lot of different viewpoints. We understand how people can take a different tack on this issue. We don't believe it rises to the level of canceling our fellowship with each other. Hey, we all need to split different directions. So we validate that there's other ways of seeing the scripture. But we needed a position for our own practice. We spent a lot of time putting it together. We believe the principal authority of the church, which for us is not an individual. It's Jesus first of all, but then it's worked down through our elder board as a permanent elder. That would mean the position of lead pastor is reserved for a man. But beyond that, our position, as we've stated it in the last couple of years, is such that we believe women are gifted in all the same ways by the Holy Spirit as men are gifted, and that because of the way we define the term pastor in our culture of the church, we believe women can serve as pastors. Now, that's a sticking point for some people in the church that are complementarian, specifically, obviously not egalitarians, because they will see, because of their history, that the terms elder and pastor to them are synonymous. So they say, how can a woman be a pastor if a woman can't be an elder? Elders are pastors. And yes, in a sense, elders provide this general spiritual guidance function in the church community, which would be this term pastor in the New Testament. But we don't say that those terms are identical in the Branches community, though they are in other places. In other churches too. They're not led by elder boards. They have a single pastor, the pastor, and nobody else holds the title of pastor. And it's sometimes referred to as the Moses model of leadership. And you'll just have one pastor, so everyone will look to that pastor as the leader of the church. And in that case, if that was our model, okay, then no, women would not serve in the role as pastor, because that would be the principal authority of the church. But that's not the way that we function. And we don't have just one pastor in our community. We have many that are providing that general guidance, spiritual guidance function in the church community, which was the general term that we believe was referred to in the scriptures. There is so much more on this topic. And you, if you're hearing some of our position for the first time, you may go, I have 10 questions now. I have heartburn through the roof right now, either this direction or that direction. Well, I have news for you. One of the first special nights and teachings that I'm going to be doing here as we step into the fall is going to be focused on this very topic. We went through years of study. We developed a position. We shared it at a town hall. That video is available on YouTube. You can see the whole town hall as we talked about that position. But that was just prior to our time of distancing. COVID hit. We're implementing, we're starting to talk through what are our processes of working into this position, and all of a sudden, bam, we've got so many things going on in this church community that took the main narrative. And other people have joined us since that time, and they haven't heard our position. So guess what? Into the fall, if you've got unresolved questions about that, even though you've been with us for years, if you've got brand new questions because you're brand new with us and you want to understand how we're approaching it and what we believe, just stick around, please. Don't shortcut the process. Don't run away. Don't just throw your hands in the air and say, this isn't the way I experienced it in the past. Sit with the scriptures. Sit with the Lord. Sit in prayer. Sit with your brothers and sisters of varying viewpoints, and let's all grow together into the future. So you can expect that in the next month and a half, there will likely be a class that I'm teaching. It's priority number one for me to talk about the place of women in leadership and in the church community. Okay, question number 4. There's a lot behind this question, but it's only asked out of love for the community. I need my glasses. I am a part of and my commitment to it. God bless you. What a great way to lead in a question that may be tense. You love the community. You're part of it. The leadership guidelines state that in order to serve in a leadership capacity, one must accept and uphold Branches HB's statement of beliefs. I love the message yesterday about Jesus being the binding element that connects all of us to each other and God. But what if people are not able to accept some of the beliefs Branches holds that are secondary to Jesus being Lord? Is that cause for leaving the community? Let me start there. That's really a decision for you. If you are stepping into leadership, there's a difference here. If you're volunteering in the Branches community, there's volunteer roles that do not require the signing of our leadership guidelines. Because our leadership guidelines are for those who are in a place of influence over the lives of others. So they're going to be seen as somebody who either has to model or uphold or provide an example for others in the community because they're naturally going to be looked to. Now, there are other servant roles in the community where the leadership guidelines are not required to be signed. If you had a sticking point in our statement of beliefs that's, cited there in our leadership guidelines, it is your responsibility to voice that. And if you cannot uphold our leadership guidelines, then you cannot serve in one of those positions of leadership. Now, that does not mean that you are excluded from serving with us in some capacity, and that does not exclude you from fellowshipping with us in some capacity. If we just told everyone immediately tomorrow, even the newcomers, the visitors, immediately tomorrow, you guys all need to agree with everything that we believe, or you have to be gone. I mean, how many people would we lose? You would lose me 10 years ago because, my understanding of the scriptures and my understanding of certain practices and certain theology has evolved over time. I've been given the ability to grow in my understanding. And there are people that are getting influenced all over the place on YouTube because their past church experience, they're not even formed by the scriptures, they're formed by their traditions. And then they come in the Branches community and we immediately say, hey, you don't have time to process that. You don't have time to think through that. You don't have time to be challenged on that or pray through that. You just got to be in or out. That's preposterous. That's not what Jesus did. That's not what he expected of the people around him. He was a shepherd that guided toward truth consistently, but patiently and with grace. And I've experienced that in my own life as a disciple of Jesus. So even if, you're a part of the community and you cannot sign up for every single thing that we believe, I encourage you, there's a reason we believe it. And we're not a church that is just going to cut corners in what we do. We take our time. We're really taking into consideration the authority of the scriptures in everything. So weigh it and walk with us and see if the Lord doesn't reveal something to you. But of course, that's not cause for leaving the community. It may be cause for you to not serve, to choose yourself, to not pursue a position of leadership, or we may ask you to not pursue a position of leadership. That doesn't mean we don't love you. That doesn't mean you're not accepted. That doesn't mean you're not welcome. That doesn't mean we aren't going to walk with you in whatever's going on in your life. Personally, you continue, I may not be able to agree with some of the beliefs. Personally, I may be able to not agree with some of the beliefs without it affecting my status at Branches. But some of Branches' beliefs do discourage me from inviting friends who are part of the LGBTQ plus community, for example. Could this be why there are so many denominations, like I talked about yesterday? Because people who are considered to be living in sin, according to one congregation's interpretation of Scripture, no matter how sincere, are not allowed to participate in the service of the church. So you're saying that you may have a disagreement about some of our beliefs, and that doesn't keep you from, attending, but you have this issue where you may be hesitant to invite others who disagree with our beliefs, particularly those of the LGBTQ plus community, because we are not an affirming church, because we do not affirm practiced same-sex relationships. And I understand that hesitancy. Obviously, there's a lot of tension in culture about this very issue, and there's a lot of tension in the evangelical church, a lot of tension across the Christian churches, and you are 100% right in assessing the fact that this is one of the contributing factors for the multiplication of denominations. It hasn't typically been through church history. The moral beliefs, the moral code of the Scriptures generally has not been, through the 2,000 years, an area of discrepancy and division. I'm just being honest with you. This is something that is being revised currently in our cultural moment. It was much more common for denominations to be spun off because of elements of theology and relationships to the sacraments. What you think of church leadership structure and how churches should be led, or what you believe about the authority of the Bible, or what you believe about baptism, or what you believe about how worship should go in the church community. And many of these things, I think we would all agree, are open to some varying degrees of interpretation. Although there would be someone who'd come along and say, we've done it all wrong, this is the only way to do it, and this is what the Scriptures say, so we've got to break off and create our own denomination. I'm going to tell you that, affirming same-sex relationships is more of a new phenomenon, a very new phenomenon. I mean, in my own lifetime, I've seen it become a new phenomenon for just political parties. Universally, political parties, when I was younger, did not affirm same-sex relationships as valid for marriage. That was both Republicans and Democrats. There was talk of civil unions, but there's been this very quick change in culture. And of course, that's affected churches. And now you have seen a lot of the mainline denominations splitting in half. And not necessarily in half in membership, but in half multiplying out as here's the affirming Methodist churches, here's the non-affirming Methodist churches. And sure, it's going to bring a lot of division. I'll say this. Statistics have shown that churches that followed this trend of, I don't know what terms you want to use, but moving toward affirming are the churches that are declining the fastest in our culture. Because once you start to question the moral Scriptures here and the authority of the Scriptures as defining cultural practices in some of these realms, you've already kind of, cut the legs out from under some of the more, developed ideas pulled from the Scriptures as a whole. And the Scriptures kind of sort of melt away, and you realize, you can sort of build an ethic apart from Christianity. You can find everything that you need just in culture itself. And people have just made that move. Oh, wait, we can just be affirming people that are, part of social programs that are government-led or, not even faith-based at all. And we still got our Christian, pseudo-values. So, those are some of the dynamics that are going on. And is it going to affect us? It's 100% going to affect us. The first thing on our webpage, I do not want to be, hey, this is our theological viewpoint. We are not an affirming church. And that's just basically saying, hey, anyone that's exploring, anyone who has no concept of the faith, who doesn't have an understanding of their own sexuality, immediately they go, I can't explore my faith there. I can't discover anything there. These people are going to be hostile toward me. That's the furthest thing from the way that we're going to relate to people who are of an affirming lifestyle or who have affirming beliefs. We're going to walk with them. We're going to discover what the scriptures say. Jesus was called, and of course, these are our sincere beliefs. We believe that practicing in same-sex relationships is sin, but Jesus was called a friend of sinners and tax collectors, those that were seen as outcasts, those that were seen as other from the religious institution. So he moved toward those individuals. So yes, we can hold to the moral standards that we believe the scriptures clearly demonstrate, but we also are bound by the heart, the emotion, the humility of Jesus in relating to people. I had an individual reach out to me. Their church was going through some drama here in Huntington Beach. She was in a same-sex relationship, a marriage. She'd been with her partner her wife for years and years and years. And she said, we're looking for churches. We like what we see when we're watching your videos. Would we be welcome in the Branches community? And you know what? I don't and ha. I don't try to put up this front like I can't tell you what we actually think sort of a thing. And I was outright about that. I said, you know what? I'm not going to make you discover our beliefs slowly over time and falsify what we believe. We are not an affirming church. Sincerely, we understand that you see something different in the scriptures. You're pursuing Jesus on your terms and is doing so sincerely, but we sincerely cannot affirm a same-sex lifestyle. But that does not mean that you are not welcome in our church. I know the people of our church community. I know that they're going to welcome you with open arms. I know that people are going to extend friendship. I know that people are going to walk with you. I know that people aren't going to immediately just give you a glare and say you're not, welcome in this space. And this woman's response was very gracious back to me. She said, you know what? We've decided to stick with this church through the drama. I really respect the fact that you honored me enough to tell me what you guys actually believe, walked me through it. You wrote a substantial note back to me. I can tell you if we are looking for churches in the future, Branches will be a place that we'll check out and we'll stop by. And so not everybody's going to be in that place who's of that lifestyle, who's decided that they have different convictions about the scriptures. And a lot of people who are in, the LGBTQ plus community, they're looking at their sexual identity and themselves as in a very fluid way. They don't even have this developed idea that the scriptures have affirmed it. They don't even know what the scriptures have said. So again, we want to be a place where these individuals can come and discover and learn about the scriptures and talk with a pastor and pray about things and be loved. Be loved genuinely, just as Jesus would love all those around them. We're going to genuinely, with our words and with our actions, love whoever walks in through the doors. I mean, people who are, cheating on their spouses and people who are, completely, addicted to pornography. These are people that are in sin. There's a lot of sexual sin in our culture, and we're going to walk with everybody in our community. Is everyone going to want to be walked with? Is everyone going to want to walk through those conversations and hear somebody say, I don't affirm that? We know that's not going to be the case, and that's just one thing we have to accept. Jesus, he was very accepting. He would go as far toward anyone as they were willing to go with him, but there were also times where he drew a line in the sand, and he said, this is what it means to follow me, and people looked at it and said, I don't want that. I have something else that I'm attached to more than that, whether it was wealth or it was their religious identity or it was anything else. And that's going to be the case in Orange County. It's not just going to be about their sexual orientation. It's going to be about their wealth. It's going to be about how they want to spend their time. It's going to be about, how someone tells them to live or doesn't tell them to live, all the above. So you finally say, I know this is a topic that can be divisive because of people's opinions on it, but I know a lot of people who have serious doubts about if they can be part of the church because of issues like these. If it is too much for tonight, I totally understand. Apparently, it wasn't too much for tonight. I mean, you tell me if it was. But there is so much more to say, and we have to talk more about this, because certainly I don't know that this is the primary reason. I don't even know that it's one of the primary reasons, but it's certainly one of the most stated reasons that people say they have left the church. Now, I oppose that a bit, because there are affirming churches, by the way. So if that was the one thing that people weren't going to church for, then these affirming churches would just be jam-packed full of people who didn't feel welcome in a traditional church. And guess what? They're emptying. They're nearly empty. So to me, it's about much more going on than just the church is not affirming, therefore I don't feel safe in a church. But that's, of course, debatable. That's an opinion, and I'm not saying I have the corner on truth on that. Let's keep talking about it. And I love that you love the community, and I love that you're willing to work through these issues, and I hope that you don't love me any less for just being honest with you and walking through this as we're all growing in our understanding. Question number 5, what is our basis for partaking in communion once a month rather than every week? With the importance we see in Scripture of the grandness of communion, my eyes only work for a few moments. Why wouldn't we partake in the ceremonial elements every week? Love this church. Thank you, Andrew. I love this church. Thank you. All right. Why don't we take communion every week? With the importance placed on the communion in the Scriptures, I see exactly what you're saying here. And there is nothing in the Scriptures that says take communion once a month, as we currently practice. There is nothing that says, set in stone, Branches is observing communion the correct way. They're observing it once a month. And I do think there is a case to be made that the early church was not only observing communion every week if they were, in their pseudo synagogue type gathering on the weekend, or if they had their Christian gatherings in their homes. I believe they were likely observing communion, and it appears to be in Acts chapter 2 that they were observing communion frequently. Like they would do it in what we would call our community groups. Like they would come together for a meal, the breaking of bread, and along with that would likely be a portion where they honored the sacrifice of Christ and remembered and oriented around that meal. So I think your question is, I don't know how else to say it, just valid. And it's one that I've actually presented a few times to our staff and to our leadership. We came from a tradition that was set for us in Rock Harbor. And Rock Harbor had its own journey with communion. They would take it corporately for a period of time and in a fixed part of the service. But then they actually moved to it being an individual thing, where individuals knew that at the cross stations that were set up around the room, they could elect at any point during worship to go and observe communion by themselves. And I don't know, again, that's like a biblical, example of how to partake in communion, because you're sort of serving yourself rather than being served communion in community, which appears to be more like the table setting that communion was taken in the early church. But it was addressing something like, hey, we don't want communion to just be rote and routine. We want people's hearts to be in it. Like, if you feel led, if you want to partake in this, go and observe this. And so again, like, I'm not saying that was a mandate in the Scriptures, but it was developed out of a value system that I understand it. And so we inherited that, but it began to be a question for us as people were not really observing communion and didn't really understand that practice. Okay, how are we going to observe it? And we wanted to build it in as more a communal thing again. And though we're not seated around a table, there's not a meal at every one of our gatherings, though we do it once a month, let's have individuals serving it. And then that became problematic during COVID because, first of all, we were distanced. And then after that, how does everyone in the congregation feel about someone handing them a piece of bread that they've broken up with their hands and then dipping that in the same cup of juice as everyone else has dipped the bread in? That became just, sort of another concern. So we're carrying this value of, are we hurting someone's conscience and keeping them from communion based on the way that we're practicing it? So what I'm trying to say is our practice of communion has been evolving. We had a sermon series where we practiced communion every week for the month. I called for that in that sermon series. And then I can tell you, my personal preference was to sort of continue that. And I presented that to the team. Does anyone else have this value to continue that on a weekly basis moving forward? And it just wasn't this drive from the team. And I got to just say, my style of leadership is not such that I just go with my preference. And I sit down with a group of 5, 6 people and say, hey, all 5 of you feel this way, but the lead pastor feels this way because of my tradition. I grew up in a church that observed communion every week. And so, I'm just going to unilaterally, okay, we're doing it. Or if after a study on communion, as an elder board, as a staff team, we agree together, okay, because of the scriptures, the example there, we now have a value for taking it every week. And I can't tell you how that'll turn out. But I can tell you, as a non-denominational church that's 5 years old, that's been working through these issues and practices, both those we've inherited and those we want to develop for ourselves, communion is one of those things we are going to get to. We believe it's an important practice. We have it regularly in our gatherings. It's key. Jesus told us to observe it. We are observing it. I don't think it makes us way less spiritual than another church that's observing it every week or observing it in a different way, but I do think that it's worthy of more study. So personally, I think it's a great question, and I hope that I'm admitting not just our position on communion, but a little bit your understanding of how we work as a church community, and the fact that I'm not just going to give you some false answer. I think there's further study needed, and there's further discussion needed on that topic, and I can guarantee you it'll happen. Question 6. I didn't see any mention in the budget of savings. Is some portion of incoming funds being allocated to the future and protecting the church from unforeseen risks? Great question. Let me pull up just a few stats here that I have so that you can understand what our cash position is. My first answer is 100%. We do care about sustainability. We do care about making sure that we're prepared. Should we be forced into a time of distancing? Should there be a great economic crisis? Should something amazing come up? Like Common Ground needs to buy a facility, or a church is going to be planted from our community and we want to support it. Like, it's not just about like hedging our bets against something awful happening and retaining staff and not laying off people, but it's also about like when God calls, have we been prepared to act upon what God is calling us into? Are we being smart with our finances? And to that end, we were extremely frugal in our first several years. I want to say to the point where it really strained us from a staffing perspective, from a facilities perspective. There was so much that we wanted to do, and that people probably felt when they were first joining the Branches community. Hey, why aren't we doing this? Why isn't this going on? And we were just maxed out because, number one, we started from $0, and we had to retain the staff that were with us. We had to pay rent at the senior center, buy all of our equipment, and we committed to giving $150,000 to the church that we had left because we knew that they were depending on funds from the future that were going to be funneled through us to their main hub. So we made a commitment, $150,000 back to them. And then at the same time, we're going, wait a minute, though, we need an operational reserve. How do we sign a lease? How do we prepare for the unforeseen if we don't have near 3 months of our expenses logged away for the future? So for the first several years, I mean, everyone made sacrifices on our team, and we just struggled, and we were in the worst little tiny closet of an office space, if we even had an office space, and we didn't hire staff, and we got our operational reserve. So right now in our operating reserve, we have $340,000. We fully funded that prior even to COVID. And because of the gifts of many of you, because of the cost savings we had stepping out of the senior center, we did draw down on our cash balance some at times above and beyond that operating reserve, but we never had to tap into it. Now, as far as our general reserve above our operating reserve, like what's just our cash balance on hand, it currently stands around $135,000, which has major swings week to week depending on giving. And I can tell you, because of our expenses that are increasing, I mean, we've got inflation going on. We needed to increase salaries for the staff team. It would be impossible not to. I'm telling you, with where minimum wage is going and the work that our team is doing, nobody is getting paid an exorbitant amount. Nobody is getting rich off the branches community. I promise you that. We have lay elders that look into it. We've got lots of accountability. We have a healthy compensation model, and people are making sacrifices to work here. But we had to make some moves there. And so I'm saying, expenses went up this year. We're projecting maybe in the 1.45, 1.46 arena. When giving this last year was 1.4, we're hoping that people step in and contribute. They see this moment in history. They know that this is the time to give. But I'll tell you that general amount of funds, it's been as high as $210,000, and now it's hovering at about $135,000. So we're smart. The elders watch that. We take concern with that. We never want to touch the operating reserve. That's not what it's there for. We don't want our cash balance to diminish because we want to be able to respond to the things that are going to come in front of us. We never want to say no to something God is doing. We also have these building campaign funds that people have given, $289,000, which people gave specifically for a future facility. So we've got a cash balance, but we also have money that isn't ever going to be used for salaries, is never going to be dipped into in a time of trouble. It's not our cash flow fund. It's literally has a facility opened up that is right for us, that fills our needs, that's going to continue on the ministry work that's happening. We stepped into this warehouse space. We believed this would be the space that we would renovate, that we'd spend 10 years in. We had a 5-year lease with an extension to 10 years. We've been in it about half that first term. So we have about 2+ years left in this warehouse. Circumstances are such, and I fully communicated this to all the givers, that we don't see this as our long-term answer. We're not going to spend money on this facility because we will be leaving it, and we will be looking for a midweek facility at minimum, and possibly a facility that houses everything that we do, including the weekends. I mentioned this on the video, and we already know this. We know churches in this city with capacities to seat 450 people, 500 people on a Sunday that have 15 people in them. I mean, that's just the facts of it. There are a lot of churches that have completely suffered. I told you it was 135, the average church in America 20 years ago. The average church in America right now has 65 people. There are people beneath that threshold. There are churches beneath that threshold here in Huntington Beach. And there are big denominations that are going to sell these facilities, and they're going to be turned into high-rise developments. They're going to be turned into, shopping malls, whatever. They're not going to be churches anymore if there aren't churches with the financial capacity to step in and say, we're going to keep that a religious assembly. And if you filled all the churches on a Sunday in Huntington Beach, let's say we were just packed out, there's revival happening, everyone's in church. I don't know, would we see 20, 30,000 people in a city of 220,000 people? So there are some people who say, I'm anti-building. We should only ever rent. We're in the largest rental that the city has, and there are not that many rentals. So if we're really looking at everybody, man, woman, and child in the city of Huntington Beach has an opportunity to be in a church and to be discipled and to gather with other believers, hear God's word and worship, we don't need to lose any religious assemblies in the city. We need to increase the amount of religious assemblies that we have, and the stats would say that we're not even going to be able to keep pace with that. These buildings are going to go away. So I'm saying there likely will be opportunities, and I'm not just saying it's automatic. First thing that comes up, hey guys, $10 million giving campaign. That's not the way that we work. If an opportunity came up, the elders would pray about it. We'd invite the community into it, and we'd all make that decision together, and we'd all make those sacrifices together, myself included, to make those opportunities a reality. So there is a fund people have already given to. They already believe in that future, the future for their children, the future for the ministries that are being housed out of this warehouse that we want to see continue after these 2.5 years. So that's a little bit of our savings right now. We're projected to decline in that general overflow fund, that cash flow fund that's now sitting at about $135,000. We don't need to. We don't need to get by. We don't need to just, hit our liabilities every year. We have the ability to have that increase. We have the ability to give more substantially to our ministry partners. We have the ability to become what we believe we need to become for this country, a church planting church, a church that has enough excess to be giving $100,000 to this church plant, $100,000 to plant a church in this city in California and this state in the country. We need more churches that are planting churches. We believe we can be that church when that 41% of our congregation that's giving less than $1,000 a year, likely less than 1% of their annual income says, I'm actually going to give sacrificially like my other brothers and sisters. It would radically change. We're not even going to be thinking about savings. We're going to be thinking about what do we do to expand the kingdom? What do we do to expand the kingdom in Huntington Beach, in this state, in this country? And that's the mode we need to be in if we're going to have a great reversal in our country. Okay, so I'm calling you into it. Please join us who are giving sacrificially. Question number 7. Does Branches have any plans to have women start preaching on Sundays? We had a gathering a few years ago where Branches expressed its stance where women were able to preach, but we haven't seen any women preach since then. Along with this question, I would love to know if Branches will be updating any of their women staff titles to pastor like their male counterparts. I love Branches in our leadership and appreciate how transparent and willing they are to answer questions. As a woman, this question is very important to me to know that I have a voice at the church and can see people I can relate to in leadership. And I did thank you for your question. I love this church community. I'm going to say that back to you every time. There is transparency here. This is, I gave the story because someone else asked that question. 2 years ago, pre-COVID, we started to unveil, our stance and what our practice would be moving forward. That meant building some systems. Okay, if we're going to extend this title of pastor to women, there are men here who have that title of pastor. Well, what is the system of affirming pastors through our elder board? Because it's not just like, okay, now everybody's just a pastor, then the title has no significance whatsoever. So it needed some consideration, and it needs to be, consistent. We can't just say arbitrarily, okay, that person's a pastor, that person's not, that person is, that person's not. So we had to develop, a plan and a process that's been developed, that is being implemented as we speak. People are submitting their qualification, why they believe they're qualified to the elder board right now. A woman teaching on Sunday, that would never happen out of the blue. It wouldn't have been out of the blue 2 years ago, but it would have been a little bit jarring to walk through that in a time of distancing where for 9 months we were not in person. And there were already enough tensions going on in our culture around us that you need to throw one more ingredient in there of change. While we can't even look each other in the eye, it was unwise. And frankly, it wasn't just that women weren't teaching. A lot of other people weren't teaching, period. I stepped up my preaching and teaching so that I could be a consistent face in a time of dislocation and disorientation for the church community. So we more held course because of that crisis. And then guess what? I thought the crisis would be over when we came together. And then there were 90 people in our parking lot when we came together instead of the 450 that we were pre-COVID. So again, it was a time that necessitated like a rebuilding phase to get to a point of consistent. We were burning $30,000 a month. I mean, it looked like we were going to have massive layoffs and just change the organization. I say that not to say like, here's, all these things that are more important. It just was, there were a lot of pressing, urgent matters that were going on in the church to not suddenly implement, just bam, here's a woman preaching. And with all the people that left and with all the people that are now here that have no context for our past, here. So what we're doing instead, like I said, is priority number 1, because we're in that process of qualifications for a pastor, because, behind the scenes, people didn't see this up front. I led a teaching and preaching class to have consistency for anyone who would come up and preach and teach in the future. It was an 8-week class. It involved people creating sermons and me grading those sermons. Because that was implemented, now I'm ready to come to the church community and actually walk them through, here is our position, here's why, here's the various positions, here's how we're going to relate to you if you're from a different position, if you look at this in a different light, if you don't agree with us, here's ongoing conversation. That's going to happen. And then you'll see somebody invited to preach on a particular Sunday. So just a reminder, both men and women submitted to this process, both the qualifications of a pastor, and if they're going to preach and teach on Sundays, they had to go through the preaching class, whether or not they had already been preaching in the past. We want consistency on this topic before we're just going to jump into an application. We appear very slow to some people, and I'll just take that. I'll take that as, granted. If you felt the process was far too slow, I receive that criticism. That is part of like our, lack of resources at certain points, our lack of bandwidth at certain points because of the pressing things in this community, but also because we have a stated value of being deliberate and pastoral in a conversation that could be very divisive, and to be deliberate with our processes so that we are consistent. We're not just going, okay, bam, here's the change. No, there were a lot of things that needed to change for the cultural changes to take place that you're going to see in the coming months. So again, within the next month to 2 months, the elders will be brought through the teaching in the class that I'm going to lead the entire congregation through. We want consistency from our leadership level first. When they have affirmed the content that I will teach in that class, then I will teach that class. That's the priority that I have for a midweek class right now, is that very topic. On the other side of teaching that class, so that people can really think through these issues biblically, there will be practice that happens in our community. So again, if you feel tension about this direction or this direction, because of your past history, because of the way that you interpret the scriptures, don't shortcut the process. Even if you don't agree with us on the other side, you don't think we went far enough, or you think we went too far, learn something in the process, engage it with humility, understand the diversity in the body of Christ, understand these scriptures in a deeper way than you've ever understood them before, and grow through the process. Okay, that is all the questions that we've had tonight given to us. That doesn't mean that you can't ask more questions in the future. So please follow up with me. If this caused more heartburn, that's the last thing I wanted. But if that leads us to greater dialogue and then to greater unity with one another, then let's let that be the case. I hope this has been enlightening for you, and I hope and pray that you see the value of the kingdom, the value of God's work at this time in history, and step up to join others who are sacrificing and sacrifice for